Hello, bonjour, and welcome to your new Bonin Private Wines video. Today I want to give you a little insight into my own career into wine, or at least a feel for a winemaker's perspective on wine. If you follow this video series, you might remember that a little while ago I made a video explaining the often misunderstood difference between a sommelier and a winemaker. They are indeed completely different jobs requiring absolutely entirely different skill sets. As a comparison with the automobile industry, for example, that I know a little bit as well, that I follow a little bit, just to illustrate, if I may, the winemaker is the engineer designing conceptually and building the cars, the vehicles, while the sommelier is more of the salesman at the car dealership. Some sommeliers are very knowledgeable, very skilled as well, but it's not at all the same set of skills that are involved. Anyhow, to elaborate on how winemakers perceive and conceive wine in their minds and why I think their perspective on wine is very interesting, I want to tell you about 3 reasons why winemaking as a craft is incredibly humbling, which is probably why, if you've ever met a winemaker, why winemakers are often very humble and very approachable, while sommeliers, let's go. You see, winemakers are farmers, and I guess I'm talking here more about vintners than the pure winemakers, those that are involved with growing the grapes in the vineyards as well as making the wine at the winery, which most winemakers are. I'm talking about winemakers in small to mid-sized wineries here, winemakers who also oversee, often together with a viticulturalist, the growing and the cropping of grapes as well as making the wine. In some massive wineries, winemakers may sometimes be only strictly dedicated to the winery operations, but that's not the majority of winemakers, especially in Europe here, where there's loads of very small producers. We call them vignerons or vintners that grow their grapes and make their own wine with their own grapes, and they have to do a little bit of everything inside and outside. As a winemaker, all year long you have to deal with the threats coming from the sky. First, it's the winter frost that can damage the vines and compromise the whole year's production. There's attacks from diseases. If it's too humid, there's rain during the flowering that can affect the flowers' pollination, excessive heat waves and drought. That's during summer, which can affect quality and yield. There's rains during harvest, which can cause the grapes to start rotting on the vines, and so on and so on. So many risks. Like a farmer, a winemaker cannot rest assured everything's going to be all right ever, because you simply don't control the weather. And every winemaker experiences some damage to the crop at some point or another in his or her career. To give you one of my own experiences, one year in September, as I was working in Spain as a winemaker of a small winery, we were still waiting for the grapes to ripen fully outside. There was, in principle, probably another week or 2 waiting before we would start picking. So, quite relaxed. It was a Saturday night, so with a few winemaking and viticulturalist friends, we were having a barbecue dinner party, celebrating the last moments of free time and relaxation before the craze, the absolutely craze and hard work of harvest. Then we started hearing thunders. The wind started blowing strongly and a huge thunderstorm hit our area. So we sheltered inside and the sky literally started falling on us. I think it rained nearly a meter of water that night, so that's around 3 feet. A lot of water and nothing we could do about it. So we cooked the meat in a pan, barbecue was impossible, and went to bed earlier than anticipated. The next day, the 4-wheel drive, let me tell you, the truck came in really handy to have, as most vineyards were completely damp, if not flooded. From there, what was looking like it was going to be a great vintage turned into a frantic race. The grapes that weren't quite ripe enough yet started rotting on the vines from so much humidity. We called as many pickers as we could find to start picking grapes frantically as quickly as possible, day and night, to save the entire year's crop and revenue. I thought I had it all under control before that, but I didn't. You never can with wine. Working 18 hours a day for the next few weeks, we did manage to save the vintage and produce decent quality wine, but humbling it certainly was, to say the least. What a struggle it was. We saved millions of dollars worth of wine that year, but we didn't make millions. Humbling. And then growing the grapes, you must know, takes about half the year in the life schedule of a winemaker, from when the vines start budding after dormancy, after winter, and so they start budding around March, and you grow the grapes until harvest, and that's around September. So half the year. The other half of the year is spent mostly inside in the winery, turning grape juice into delicious vino. That's the job. What can go wrong inside the winery, you may ask? Well, wine is a natural product. It's not transformed or processed through chemistry at all, but through biology, thanks to microorganisms called yeast and lactic bacteria. The problem is, not all microorganisms that love wine or that can grow in grape juice produce things that can taste really good. Some natural yeast can release horrible tasting flavors in the wine, and there are trillions of bacteria that would love to turn your wine into vinegar if you'd let them. So everything needs to be monitored constantly through lab analysis and through tasting, and I guess tasting is the fun part of the job. It is, but it's professional tasting. Rigorous, cold-headed tasting, this is. This is indeed easier to control, though, this whole winemaking process, than the weather, that's for sure. You can inoculate with good selected yeast, even some bacteria in some instances. You can use sulfur dioxide, this preservation molecule that inhibits bacterial growth, etc. But still, every once in a while something comes up, a fermentation gets stuck and you don't know why, meaning that the yeasts stop fermenting and transforming the sugars into alcohol properly, so the wine remains sweet, and it's dangerous because other microorganisms can grow on it and turn it into, sour. So many things can go wrong. An employee can add the wrong dose of sulfur, for example, or anything else that could go wrong through the hundreds of operations that happen making wine in a winery. Bottling is tricky as well, because wine is food that is ingested by people, so it has to be perfect and 100% safe. So you can't take the next day for granted ever as a winemaker, always on your toes, always. And yes, this phrase, the more you know how much there is that you don't know, is probably true for most complicated fields of expertise: engineering, law, finance, rocket science. I'm sure it is, but it certainly is particularly true with wine. Now, the science of wine is very complex because it's chemistry with thousands of natural molecules blended together and interacting with each other. It's lab analysis, as we talked about, it's microbiology, it's plant physiology, etc. All combined in one science called enology. But there's also knowing and understanding all of the different types of wines, hundreds of different grapes, thousands of appellations around the world. Every village is different because the soil is a little bit different, because the incline of the nearby hill affects how hot, cold air circulates in the vineyards, because the oceanic influence that comes up the valley varies from vineyard to vineyard. If it's up or down, there's a rock here or a hill there. etc. It's all really incredibly patchy in the world of wine. Every producer is different and every vintage is distinct within those different producers. Wine professionals in retail or sommeliers deal with, say, 100 wine items in wine lists at a wine shop or a restaurant, and some think they really know their wine because they know those 100 wines, and maybe it's going to be 200, 300, 500 different wines on the list. But that is nothing in the world of wine. It's literally just a drop of wine in an ocean of wine. I worked for a website for a few years and we were building a database listing all of the wines in the world, or working at it, and we had listed hundreds of thousands of different wines when I left that company, and we were far from being finished. There are possibly close to, if not over, 1 million different wines in the world. So 100 is nothing when you know how unique each of these wines is, because you know it was bred by a different vineyard, a different year, by a different winemaker, using a different cooperage that uses different oak from different forest. When you know all of those little details that make every wine unique, then when you know the winemaking craftsmanship that is involved in the winemaking, only then do you know the most important aspect of wine, which is that you, as a wine industry player, actor, you don't know everything. You actually know very little. In fact, as smart as you might think you are. When you understand this, then you understand that you do not know everything, that there are things that others know that you don't know. This is why I think, in my humble opinion, most winemakers don't talk down to people about wine, because they know that they don't know everything, that you know things that they don't know. And it's unfortunately not a trait that you find with everybody that you talk to in the wine industry. Not every wine professional in the industry has this humility. And now perhaps you have a perspective on why. And I'll leave it here for today. Thanks for watching. I will see you soon in the wonderful world of wine. Cheers. Santé.